Welcome. I'm Marcella Allison. My guest is Richard Armstrong, and we are here with the first ever live streaming of the Great Books Club. And wherever Denise is, huge shout out to Denise for figuring out how to do this. I am just thrilled. Yay, Denise! I asked Richard to do this book with me for a couple reasons. One, I wanted to say to you, you've heard over and over here in the past day and a half, the value of making connections. And I met Richard at last year's boot camp. He was sitting right there in the back row. And I came over, sat next to him. We started up a conversation that led to, we're actually working on our second project together. I guess third, if you count the two that we're working on. And he had mentioned to me in the course of one of those conversations that he wanted to reread the great books again. And I said that that was a goal that I had for this year too. You also heard John Carlton talk about that. He gave you at least 3 books during his talk. I keep a list of those. This is just my little trick. And for those of you who own a Kindle, you know how you can go onto the Kindle and ask it to send you the first chapter of a book for free? So here's my little tip. Anytime I'm at a conference and someone mentions a great book and I've got my Kindle or my iPhone with me, I jump online, I go to Amazon.com, I find the title, and I send myself the first chapter, and then that becomes my to-read list, okay? You'll also see if you want to join us, I know not everybody here is a member. If you want to join us, you can go, if you just Google AWAI Great Books Club, you will get the sign-up page. And it's very simple, and best of all, it's free. So this, again, is a great way to go through the canon, as I call it, of the Great Books Club, meaning all those books on writing, on marketing, on goal setting, on copywriting, that you really need to be aware of and need to be reading and need to be familiar with. So I want to kick off this live boot camp by saying we are going to read, we have read actually, Claude Hopkins, My Life in Advertising and Scientific Advertising. I want to just ask you, Richard, just to say real quick why, because I loved that email that you sent out, why you picked My Life in Advertising and Scientific Advertising, why, even with all your experience and all your awards, you felt like you needed to read this book again.
Well, first of all, let me say to the people who heard me speak last night, you're about to find out how stupid and inarticulate I am when I don't have a script actually in front of me.
And I already violated rule number 1, which was not to ask you a question that wasn't on the script.
Right. I said to Marcella,
like,
please keep to the
to
question. No, I can answer this one because I've already answered it, and that is that this is like if you were teaching a course on philosophy, on Western philosophy, you would start with Plato, I'm sure. If you were teaching a course on Western religion, you would start with the Holy Bible. And this is not only the oldest, at least that I know of, the oldest book on advertising and copywriting. It still remains, to this day, one of the very best. So to me, it was an absolute no-brainer to choose this particular book.
And you know what? We were just at the Titans conference together. I don't know if Brian Kurtz is in here. And there were at least 3 speakers who mentioned reading this book multiple times, yes, including the fantastic Gary Bensavenga, who's retired and still reads it every year.
Every year.
So if you haven't read it yet, don't worry. We still want you here. We still want you to join us. You'll get a lot out of this presentation, and then it goes on your to-do list as the first book to read when you get home, or on the airplane if you have one of those clever little Kindle devices. So one of the things that you're going to hear about Claude Hopkins is that he's considered really one of the founding fathers of advertising. And some of the brands that he worked on that you will recognize today as household names were Palmolive soap, Pepsodent toothpaste, Van Camp beans. He took these from basically obscurity and turned them into household names. And that is the power of his copywriting. The other thing that he is known for is that he's the first one who really began to make measurable results. In other words, there were coupons. People turned in the coupon. When they turned in the coupon, you knew that how many people had cut that out of the paper and sent it back in, and that had never been done before. And this idea that you could actually measure, right, the impact of advertising was new. And I love it, Richard, when you compared Clayton Makepeace to a gecko last night. And described how, what did you say, it was like $6 billion that they're spending on that?
No, they spend $1 billion a year on advertising, and I just, I made the point, if they just give that to Clayton, then everybody in the world would have Geico insurance.
Instead, we have a clever lizard, right, running around.
Yeah.
Well, Claude Hopkins is definitely on the side of the Clayton Makepeace School of Advertising, not on the side of the lizard, right? So rule number one that I want you to remember from here is, we are not on the side of the lizard. We are on the side of
yes.
scientific advertising. And scientific advertising will win every time. So let's get into the goodies. If you have your book, let me just ask, how many people in here are members of the Great Books Club now?
Oh, good.
I
Good.
took that away from for you, I took that away from my mouth when I screamed. Okay, anybody bring the book? Get your book out if you got all right. See, I love people who are prepared. Girl Scouts, right? We're all Girl Scouts over there. As those of you who hopefully will be joining at the end of today, or even as we speak on your smartphones, will learn, we like to stay with the text. I come from a long tradition at the University of Chicago where you start out with the great books, you read the original text, and that's what we're doing. We're starting with we're not reading people talking about Claude Hopkins, we're reading Claude Hopkins. So take your book out, we'll get going. Let's start with our first question here. So the first question is, so many of the techniques that Claude Hopkins invented and that he used today, we think we invented. We think all these things are new, right? And here he's writing about them in the 1920s. And when you mentioned that to me, I just thought that was fascinating, right? Like he's a perfect reason why everything old is new again.
Yeah,
Can you give us some examples?
I have read the book a number of times, and I've read it twice this year because I knew I was going to be doing this. And each time, I was struck by how many times he anticipated techniques and strategies that wouldn't come into the mainstream until many, many years later. I mean, when he made those deals with the bakers, for example, to use that lard called cotasuit, that's what we call joint venture marketing nowadays. And the internet marketers all think, well, we came up with this. But no, it's more than 100...
Internet marketers think they came up with everything.
Yeah, exactly. It's been around for more than 100 years. And another example is when he gave, or he let drugstores or druggists give an endorsement to that patent medicine called Liquozone. Well, that's what we call nowadays affinity marketing. And affinity marketing's been around a little while. It's been around maybe 10 or 20 years. We've been using that term. But again, here's a guy who's working in the 19th century or the early 20th century. It's just amazing. But my favorite example of this was the story about the egg incubator. Do you remember that? Because he just, I think he was, he's like working 20 hours a day, but he felt he still needed to do a little more work. So he found some guy who wanted to sell an egg incubator, and he said, now here's what we'll do. I'm going to write a book all about incubating eggs, and I'm going to find some farmer to sign the book. So in effect, I'm ghostwriting it. And it would talk about, everything you needed to know about incubating eggs, and how to find the right chickens, and do this and do that. And then there would be several chapters in there about which are the best egg incubators to buy and why. And not surprisingly, the one that they like the most is the one that they're selling.
How convenient.
Well, when I thought this, I thought, well, guess what? That's what we call nowadays a book-a-log. And we think we in direct mail, we think we invented the book-a-log about, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago or something like that. But here he's back, he's doing it in 1910 or something. So it's just amazing. A couple more examples. He also invented membership marketing. Remember the Racine Shoe Company? That you had to be a member of their thing in order to get the discount.
On his shoes, that's right.
We call that membership marketing nowadays. And there's a particular aspect of membership marketing called Member Get a Member, or MGM. He invented that too 100 years ago. And then probably the greatest thing of all was the Schlitz beer story, is the absolute classic example of a unique selling proposition. And the interesting thing about that from a historical point of view is that The phrase unique selling proposition wasn't coined until Rosser Reeves wrote a book called Reality in Advertising, and that happened 50 years later. So when we think back at the USP now, we think back to Rosser Reeves because he coined it and he wrote the book. But again, who was doing it back in 1910? Claude Hopkins. So here's the way I look at Claude Hopkins. He is like the Thomas Alva Edison of marketing and advertising. And in a way, that answers your first question. That's why you start with this book.
Absolutely. I think that is so true. You know, I had to crack up. I went to pick up my son at high school the other day, and I saw a kid come out wearing a pink Izod shirt. It was a boy, a pink Izod shirt with the collar flipped up. Uh-huh. And I was like, oh my God, it's 1980 again. You know, it's so true, right? We think that all this stuff is new. And really, it goes in cycles. Things get reinvented. We remember things. And what I loved about John Carlton's talk this morning is he's like, look, if you go to the library, and don't ask me to pull out of my ear the Dewey Decimal numbers he gave you, but he's saying, look, if you go to the library, or I would say, if you join AWAI's Great Books Club, shameless plug there for a free book club, and you read the canon of literature, you are already going to know more than your clients because, one, they haven't read it, and two, if they read it, they forgot it, okay? That's like the simplest thing you can do to become an expert is get a library card or Amazon Prime membership, which has been my downfall.
I've always said that you could go on Madison Avenue at high noon on Tuesday morning and shoot a high-powered rifle right down Madison Avenue and not be in any danger of hitting anyone who ever read a book about advertising.
I love it. That's perfect.
So think of the tremendous advantage you have just by reading this one book.
Exactly. I found this really interesting in the book. When he's talking about, and he does this several times, how many people remember the sections where he goes into the difference between selling and offering a service? Any of you who've read the book, do you remember the difference between the two? Okay, so I found this really interesting. And so what I said to Richard is, can you, and I want to read this little quote here to get us started, but I said, can you help me understand the subtle difference between selling and offering a service? I'm a kind of a concrete gal, and when things get too abstract, I get a little lost. So I want to look at the quote here. This is on page 72 for you playing. Those of you playing the game at home, we're on page 72. These are his words. The difference lies in the basic conception of selling. The average salesman openly seeks favors, seeks profit for himself. His plea is, buy my goods, not the other fellow's. He makes a selfish appeal to selfish people, and of course, he meets resistance. I was selling service. And this is where he's talking about, how the heck do you say that? Is it katsuit?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
It does not sound like something I want to eat. Can I just tell you that, let alone in a cake? Can you talk a little bit, Richard, about that difference between selling and bringing up resistance and offering a service?
Well, I believe that this is the most important message in the book, and I think he, in one way or another, he comes back to it over and over again. And I have a slightly different take on it. I'm going to take you through it in terms of you as a copywriter. I think one of the most difficult things to grasp in this business when you're starting out is figuring out who's this really about. And most copywriters start out, and this is true of me too, most copywriters start out thinking it's all about themselves. It's all about their own creativity, their own imagination, their own ability as a writer. It's about all the tricks that they've learned by, attending seminars or reading books and things like that. And in fact, most copywriters never break out of this stage. I would say that probably the vast majority of copywriters on Madison Avenue never break out of it. And they're like, they're like butterflies who've never broken out of the cocoon. Now, they don't even realize that there's so much more potential out there once they get out of the cocoon and realize that this is all about something or somebody other than themselves. Now, the next stage that copywriters go through is when they realize it's not just about creativity. They start to look at the product, and they start to understand the difference, for example, between features and benefits.
Okay.
they start to understand what the unique selling proposition is. And these copywriters are kind of in the larval stage. And at this point, you're capable of making good money for yourself, you're capable of making good money for your clients, you're capable of selling, but you haven't really had the final breakthrough. And for some copywriters, and they're not as many as you might think, have that final insight, and that is that they realize it's all about the customer. They start with where the customer is, what the customer is thinking about, what the customer is worried about, what the customer gets angry and emotional about. And it's at this point, to answer the question, once you've had that final insight, it's at this point where you're no longer even trying to sell the customer, you're trying to serve the customer because you have his or her best interests at heart. And this was the major insight that I think Claude Hopkins had, and the major message of this book, and that is that people hate to be sold. They just hate it. They put up all sorts of barriers and resistance. They don't want to deal with it. But they love to be served. Mm-hmm. And copywriters who eventually reach this level of understanding, they kind of work backwards from there. They understand that. Then they go back to the product and think about the USP and the features and the benefits. And then they go back to their creativity, their knowledge of copywriting techniques and tricks and strategies and so forth. So they're, in effect, working from the customer back. And whereas so many copywriters who are in that cocoon stage never get out of it. But now we have some butterflies here with us this week. I mean, Dan Kennedy is a butterfly, and John Carlton is, and Clayton Makepeace is, certainly. Bob Bly is a butterfly. That rhymes. Bob Bly is a butterfly.
I'm not sure, but I think you just called me a caterpillar.
Well, I was going to call...
Better than those big tomato worms I used to have at the farm.
We have some others too, but I was going to say for most of it's a process. For most of us, it's a process, and I am still working on it. I believe I'm still working on it. The important point, the thing that I want you to remember, is that you cannot think that you've got it all figured out just because you're a talented writer and you've picked up some tricks along the way. If that's the case, you're still in the cocoon, and you don't even realize you're in the cocoon.
Absolutely. And that was, again, John Carlton kicked us off this morning by saying you are always learning. Do you remember when he said if you did not raise your hand, you got the wrong answer? You are always learning. I love that phrase, Richard, serve, not sell. And I love that idea of everybody hates to be sold. Think of the most obnoxious salesman in your face pushing something on you that you don't need and you don't want. And then think of like this beautiful restaurant, 5 Michelin star restaurant, and this, very dapper, proper British gentleman who takes you to your table, the maitre d', and sits you down, and the waiter who comes over with the white cloth and, can I get you some water? And Richard, what would you like for dinner tonight? And may I offer you a bottle of wine? I mean, who are you going to want to sit down and be with? What experience are you going to enjoy? And I will make an awful paraphrase of the famous John F. Kennedy quote and say, ask not what your customer can do for you, but what you can do for your customer.
It's a very good way of looking at it.
So let's just have a group grope here. I want to say that aloud because I think that is the most important lesson from the book. So everybody repeat after me. We're going to do it again. Ask not what your customer can do for you, but what you can do for your customer. And that's the difference between starting out and becoming a butterfly. You are now always having that customer in mind. And again, another quote, you guys will find this on page 73. He said, I never ask people to buy. I rarely even say that my goods are sold by dealers. I seldom quote a price. The ads all offer service. They sound altruistic, but they get a reading and get action from people seeking to serve themselves. No selfish appeal can do that, and that's the power. Oh, heck. So along these similar lines, Claude Hopkins talks a lot about the free offer, and he talks a lot about sampling. And I want to just read this quote, and then I want to get your take on free, because we see free all the time. Like, what's that phrase? Free is the new black. And I really want to get into this, but I thought this was interesting. He says, there is a considerable difference in the psychological effect when you offer to buy an article for a woman to try and pay the dealer his price for it, as compared with offering that article free to all. The free offer cheapens a product. There's a certain resistance when we ask people to afterward pay for a product which came to them first as a gift. So I just want to ask you to talk a little bit about that concept of free, and what does he mean by that? Because aren't we all offering free offers,
Well, yeah, exactly. And I don't have an awful lot to say about this, but I did find it quite interesting because it is something that we struggle with quite a bit. Particularly nowadays, as more and more internet marketers are catching on to direct response techniques, the upshot is that we are getting freed to death nowadays. I mean, everything is for free. And Claude Hopkins realized, again, he's realizing this a century ago, he said that when we offer something for free, and in his case, he was talking about literally free sampling, where you throw stuff on people's porches.
Yeah, I used to get them in the Chicago Tribune. I'd open up and I'd have a free razor or a box of soap or something.
And Claude was just saying, when you do that, you are automatically devaluing psychologically the item in the person's mind, and that is a counterproductive thing to do. Now, Marcel and I both work in the newsletter and magazine promotion industry, and where free issues are just kind of their de rigueur. That's what we've always done. And I think I was interested in what Hopkins said you should do, and that is, rather than just give somebody something free, which makes them devalue it, why don't you say to them, look, this is something really, really important and really valuable, and I think it's going to make such a big difference in your life that I'd like to buy it and give it to you instead of saying that it's free. And I just thought about that. As a guy who writes 3 free issues, 3 free premiums, all this stuff, all the time, I'm just thinking, I wonder if there's an application there for me and for you, for all of us, is to just say, this magazine is so good, I'm going to buy the next 3 issues for you, and I am going to give them to you. And I thought, well, I'm going to try that next
Deutsch,
year.
that's our idea. That's not yours, that's ours. Okay, just so you know. And we have Michelle Woke from Boardroom in the audience here. Michelle, you have to wave your hand. So when I was thinking about the same thing, we often say this in our order cards. It would be Marty's voice, and Marty would say, look, there's information in here that could save the life of someone you know. This could save your brother, your mother. This is, 5 ways to prevent 5 signs of a heart attack that every woman should know. And he'd say, you have to have this right away, so I'm just going to send you the book. And if you don't agree with me that this is life-saving information, no harm, no foul, you can just return it back to me. I won't charge it to you. But I am so convinced not only that this can save your life, but that you really need this information right now, that I'm going to go ahead and send this to you, and all you have to do, is give me your address on the card. And I think that's so different than just free book arriving on your door.
Right.
It's truly what Marty believed. It wasn't even a gimmick. I mean, that was his passion, was he truly believed that you couldn't wait an extra day, because what if it's tomorrow that your wife has sign number 1 of a heart attack and my book isn't there yet?
Right.
You haven't read it yet.
And another thing we sometimes do in direct mail, and this technique is not new, is we'll say, not that we're going to give you this free, but that you already have it. We have one that's sitting here. It's got your name on it, and all you have to do is send us a card back saying you'd like it sent to you. So
it's exactly right.
That's another really strong way to say free without using the word free.
And I want to move on, but I just have to say quickly, I thought this was really interesting. So as I was leaving on Tuesday for the airport to come here, I got an offer in my box from Brendan, is it Burchard? Burchard, is that how you say it? For his new book, which is called Motivation Manifesto. And the email said, I have purchased this hardback book for you from the publisher. And if you will give me your snail mail address, of course I had to, right, because it was a hardback book, I will send you this book. And he did a couple things that were interesting. One, they did ask for $7 in shipping. So he actually got me to open my wallet, right? So it avoided that issue of you have a hard time getting people to pay for something for which they've received free. But he, even though he was the author, he said, I have purchased a copy from my publisher for you, and I would like you to send it. And he got, darn it, all of my information. He got my credit card information because I gave him the $7 for shipping. He also gave me a free bonus where I got like a Facebook page that was going to take me through the book and give me, I mean, I just thought I thought, wow, this is so interesting because the language, again, everything old is new again, was like verbatim, right? From the I have purchased this bar of palm olive soap for you. And I just thought.
Though that's a perfect example.
Yeah, clearly he's reading it,
that's
right?
Yeah, he's
either that or he's an internet marketer, he thinks it's new. We won't tell him that actually Claude Hopkins did it with Dove soap, right? You know what, we're going to take questions at the end because if I don't finish on time, Denise has a handgun back there. So I'm not going to mess with her. But I promise, and if we don't have time for questions, because we may run out of time because we're really tight today, I want to remind everybody that when you join the Great Books Club, the next thing you're going to do, those of you who are on Facebook, I am only on because I had to get on for the Great Books Club. This guy is like leaving posts and comments, knows how to do stuff I have no clue about. I'm like in awe. I'm in awe of you. And Richard is fantastic about engaging. So what you're going to do is after you join the Great Books Club, then you're going to go to Facebook page and you're going to send me a request. And again, it's AWAI Great Books Club. And once you join the Facebook page, you can leave comments for Richard and I. We kept the discussion going on the War of Art for 5, 6, 7, 8 rounds. So, and you've been fantastic. You've already been answering questions before we even got here. So, all right. So question number 4. What is the difference between public relations techniques and advertising? Which was the Katasuit campaign, PR or advertising? And how can freelancers benefit from knowing the difference? And just for those of you who haven't read the book yet but are going to, I'm going to give you the little background on the story very quickly. So this is the quote from the book, page 62, for those of you playing at home. I will build there, I said, the largest cake in the world. I will advertise the cake in a big way in the newspapers. I will make that, I promised, the greatest feature in your store opening. My idea was to make a cake with Katasuit in place of butter, then to argue that a product better than butter was certainly better than lard, because this was a new type of lard. When I returned to Chicago, Mr. L.F. Swift, the guy who made Katasuit, said, that is the greatest advertising stunt I have ever known. You have made good, both with Father and with me. So what do we need to know about PR, and how can that help us?
Well, this is another thing I was struck with the book in this most recent reading of it, was that he was often using public relations techniques almost as much as he used advertising. Or sometimes he used a combination. But this Katasuit story, for example, his idea was to bake the world's largest cake and to bake it with Katasuit rather than with butter. Now, that is classic public relations. It's not really advertising. He did use some advertising to let people know about it. So in that sense, it was a hybrid. But it is what... The idea of creating a stunt like that, for example, is classic public relations. And there's a subtle difference between the two kinds of marketing, and not everybody really understands it because it's subtle and it's kind of hard to wrap your mind around. But the way that I always think of it is this. If your product is mentioned on the back cover of Time magazine, that is advertising. If, however, your product is mentioned on the front cover of Time magazine, that is public relations. Now, you had to pay to get it on the back cover because it's advertising, right? On the front, you didn't pay, but it wasn't free either. It didn't get there by magic. It got there in most cases because you made a public relations effort. You put together a press release, or you have a company that has a public relations department, or you hire a PR firm. So there's a lot of effort that goes into getting that iPad or whatever it is mentioned on the front cover of Time magazine. The important point that I wanted to bring up for copywriters or people who want to make a living as a writer within the business world is that public relations people, public relations firms and public relations departments, they need writers too. They need writers to write press releases. They need them to write feature stories. They need them to write all different kinds of content. Speech writing is a public relations function. And speech writing, I know this from personal experience, is really one of the most satisfying and interesting and engaging ways to make a living as a writer in business. I was a speechwriter for about 4 or 5 years, and I just enjoyed the heck out of it. I finally decided to give it up because they were just offering me so much money to write direct mail because it pays better.
Of course it does.
But it's not that speech writing pays badly. I mean, if you're good, you're making $5,000 to $10,000 a speech, and it's just such a fun kind of way to write because you can use drama, you can use humor, you can use inspiration, you can use quotes and all these things and all the sort of stuff that you're kind of warned away from using in direct mail. So it's a very rewarding kind of writing, and I just wanted to remind you that if we tend here at AWAI, we tend to focus on our area, which is direct response copywriting, but there's a lot of other ways to make money as a writer in the world of business.
And so I just have to make a little shout out that we have a perfect example of this in the audience, which is that I don't have a road dog, I have a road diva. And my writing partner, Lois Mentrup, I'm going to make her wave over here. So Lois works, what would you say, about 75% of the time, 50% of the time with me in direct response. And the other half, she is one of the country's top PR writers. She's fantastic. She writes in the tech field, which is why I knew she could figure out finance with me. Like, if anyone could explain that stuff, she could explain this. And I remember when she had one of her articles appear in Time magazine and actually got her own byline with it, which is like unheard of, to have an advertorial with a byline.
That is the equivalent
I know how to pick my road divas. Can I just say that? And I'm very lucky. But
in baseball, that would be the equivalent of hitting a grand slam home run.
That's right.
For a publicist, that is fabulous.
And for Lois, I know, when I won't put too many words in her mouth, but, she really likes the balance that we can work for, 6-8 weeks. I am not as fast as Carlene. I will just admit that right now. I was ready to kill her. I'm looking at Michelle. I'm like, shh, she's in the audience. She's going to think I can do it in 2 weeks. It takes me a good 6 weeks to do one of those huge magalogs or longer. So when Lois is working on that with me, then in between that, she can be doing short, real-time PR things that have to go out. So again, when you're thinking of your niche, and I know we've got some fantastic meetings here about that and talking to people about that, you can grab Lois, you can ask her how she does that. But again, mixing and matching long projects, short projects, like you said, okay, this might not pay as well, but they pay on time and they pay consistently and they come back to her month after month. So I call those my keep the lights on projects or my bread and butter projects. And I always want a mix of them because the royalties on a huge boardroom magalog, by the time we get back they could be 2 years out, in terms of your rollout and how many times they mail and how many packages. But that PR client, they're going to show up every 30 days and they're going to pay you on the dot. So think about that in terms of not just different segments that you're mixing, but you also want to be thinking about this balance. And I think using some of the PR techniques, which are just brilliant in here, is a great way to do that. Okay, so this is sort of a quick throwaway, but I think it's worth mentioning because you mentioned it last night, which is, can we have a drum roll? Does humor work in advertising? Da, 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 da. Come on, you guys, drum roll on the table. Come on, are you awake? Does humor work in advertising? What's the answer, Richard?
Well, he mentions this several times. He mentions it repeatedly, and he usually just says something along the lines of, people don't buy from a clown. But on page 263, I thought he really put his finger on why funny ads generally tend not to work. He says that, and you got to forgive him here because he speaks in this kind of archaic language, but it really puts his finger on it. It may attract many times as many people, yet not secure a hearing from as many whom we want. Now, to me, that means it leads to advertising that everybody loves, but nobody buys from. Now, how many of you here have had this experience with television advertising? You're maybe at a cocktail party
or a Super Bowl.
Well, yeah, the Super Bowl. You could be at a Super Bowl party. No. That's a good example. Or you're at a dinner party or something, and the talk turns to television, and eventually it comes to television ads, and somebody says, "Oh, have you seen the ad about the guy who done it?" And everybody goes, "Yeah, that ad is great. I love that ad. That ad is wonderful. It's so creative. It's so funny." Somebody always says, "Oh, I wish all advertising could be like that. It's just great." And then at some point, inevitably, somebody raises their hand and says, what's that ad for anyway? And nobody knows. Nobody knows. Have you all had that experience? Yes. I got to tell you something funny that just happened 2 nights ago to Sharon and I. We just got here and we walked down Atlantic Avenue, and we were, accosted is not the right word, but we were confronted by some panhandlers. And I have to preface this by saying that I am like the world's softest touch when it comes to panhandlers. If somebody's holding a sign saying that I was a Vietnam vet and I'm out of work, I always give them money.
I'm right
they say, I've got a hungry child at home. I always give them money. But these 2 guys tried to approach us with humor. And they said to us, "You dropped some," or they said to Sharon, they said, "You dropped something," and Sharon looked around like this. They said, "You dropped your smile." And then they said to her as we were walking away, they said, "I hope you have a good evening with your father." Meaning me. Do you think I gave to those guys?
Not a penny.
Now, I got to tell you a funny story. Years and years ago in New York, the funniest panhandler I ever met. This is funny. I was walking by him, and he said, "Would you contribute to the United Negro Pizza Fund?" I've been laughing about that for 30 years. But I didn't give him any money because I thought to myself, look, I already contributed to the United Negro College Fund. Am I going to add pizza to this mix, So anyway, having said that, I do want to say one little caveat there. And that is that I've noticed something interesting in internet marketing recently, especially in those situations where you've got a guru and he's got a pretty big list of people who follow him very closely. I'm thinking of people that I respect a lot, like young people like Ben Settle, and Matt Fury is another one. I like Matt Fury. These are really talented guys, and I have noticed that they are not afraid to use humor in their pieces, and they do seem to work. But I would have to say that the humor usually comes within the context of storytelling. Yes. Mm-hmm. And we all know that storytelling works. So you can't make a hard and fast rule about it. But if you do use humor, I would say that the humor always has to be in the service of the prime directive. And the prime directive is selling the product.
I really like that. So that's a great quote for everybody. So the humor has to be in the service of the prime directive of the piece. Another shout out. You guys know David Deutsch back there? Wave your hand. Okay. So one of the top boardroom writers, but also you use a lot of humor in your copy and playfulness with language, but it is all in the context of the story you might be telling about, let's say this is a home remedy for mosquito bites. So there might be something about Edna going to the picnic and getting mosquito bites, and, your headline might be a play on words about, bug-bitten Bertha complains about something, right? But you're right. The point is not to make a joke. The point is to sort of do that National Enquirer entertaining style. So while people might not buy from a clown, they enjoy being entertained. And so it's a subtle difference.
It is a subtle difference. And David Ogilvy said you could never bore somebody into buying something, and that is really true. So you have to have bright, lively, entertaining writing, and Lord knows David Deutsch is one of the best in the world at that. And
he keeps me entertained on a regular basis.
I know that for a fact because I have failed to beat David's packages on about 35 occasions. So.
You realize that's why I just write with him? If you can't beat him, join him.
Yeah, I think I'll be applying to David for a job after the...
No, I think we got to beat him. That's coming up next. Okay, moving on. I'm going to make a shameless plug here. You will notice that this says, question from our book club members. So again, the nice thing is if you join the Great Books Club and you know that you were going to do the book and you read the book ahead of time and you post your question on that Facebook page that you're going to friend request me after you join the Great Books Club, then we can get the questions worked. So here's a chance to ask Richard, who's this like great brain trust next to me, a question about the book directly. And so we have some members who did that, and I don't know if they're here. Is Alan Stacy here? Oh my God, front row, yes, all right. He had some challenging questions. We had to have a whole separate call about your questions, just saying. Okay. So these are some great questions. So the first one is, in chapter 6, page 79, again, I know he read the book, right? We got chapter and verse. Hopkins states, people were not buying medicine, they were buying results. Whereas Dad Kennedy adamantly contends what works best is emotional manipulation copy versus product service-centered copy. So what techniques, tactics, and strategies best achieve that end? And here's where I pulled the quote of the druggist just to get us started. And this is from Hopkins. Then we evolved the idea of a druggist signed guarantee. People were not buying medicine, they were buying results. I conceived the idea of having a neighborhood druggist to whom people paid their money sign the guarantee. It brought enormous results. There was one cough cure which everyone could buy without risk. So, Richard, I want to just ask you, and we talked about this a little bit on our call, you know, how do you sell a result instead of a product? How do you sell that beautiful outcome they want? What are the tricks and techniques that can sell the outcome instead of just bottle of cough syrup?
Well, as I understood Alan's question, and by the way, when Alan asked the question on Facebook, I immediately responded, Alan, I said no difficult questions. And I do consider this a difficult question, but the way I understood it was that when you're in a crowded marketplace, and everybody is kind of promising the same thing, and the fact is that most of those products don't work, what techniques and strategies can you use that will help your product stand out from the others? Is that a fair summary of what you were asking? And Marcella already gave one of the key answers. I would just give one other, and that is that one of the key things, or one of the best things that you can do is take advantage of the fact that your customers have been disappointed in these other products in the past. You are leveraging their disappointment and their frustration. Now, I can't remember, is Carlene with us in this session? She may have ducked out. Okay. Well, Carlene did...
She's allowed to eat. That only happens rarely, but we do let the speakers eat.
She did an amazing magalog for a vision enhancement nutritional supplement. And if you know anything about vision enhancement, it always comes down to two supplements. One is called bilberry, and the other is called...
That's the World War II fighter pilot one, right?
Yeah, right.
Right, I remember
and the
that
other
story.
is called lutein or lutein, I'm not sure. But those two are the ones that are mentioned all the time. There have been books written about them, and every time you Google visual problems, it comes up and everything. And Carlene's piece basically said, look, bilberry and lutein don't work. You've been disappointed, you've taken them, you still can't see very well, and here's why they don't work. And I'm going to lay it out for you chapter and verse, and then I'm going to show you why my product is not like bilberry and lutein and why it really works. So I think that's one really good way to do what Alan is talking about here, is to take the disappointment, the frustration, the anger in some cases that people have about your competitors and leverage that.
Right. Absolutely. And you know, that works gangbusters in the weight loss market, because we know, especially if you have a product where you know people have tried everything under the sun and that 9 times out of 10 it hasn't worked.
Right.
You know, if I gave you a headline that said, you know, lose 10 pounds in 10 days, everyone's going to go, yeah, right. Right? You have to have something different about it, you know, by eating kumquats, by, you know, whatever it is. And then I'm like, what? Now I have to read that, right? But if you think that the solution is bilberry and lutein, I already know that, been there, done that, it didn't work, already tried that.
Right. And so so the fact that the other people out there with similar products or with competitive products can work very much to your advantage if you play it correctly.
And I want to jump ahead here. Again, this is sort of a twist, and we've kind of talked about this on question 7, where we're saying, again, from Alan, how can you outbid all others on your product? And I think we've given you some ideas for that. So I want to jump ahead and say to the second part, which is how can we apply that to ourselves as copywriters? So in other words, if the same is true, if there are multiple people writing in the space in which you want to write, how can you outbid all others? And I just want to bring up something from this morning that I thought was really interesting. Do you remember when John Carlton said, let your freak flag fly, right? Well, so one of the things that you bring that's unique is who you are. So one way to outbid all others is to let that freak flag fly. Now, again, I'm not saying that you dance naked into your clients' offices, God forbid, but I do think that there are things that are unique. So, for example, my lovely writing partner, Lois Mentrup, and I started out at Schaefer's Investment Research more than 10 years ago, and we wrote only about options trading products. We wrote about them 24/7 on a rotating basis. Every other day, another promotion for a different type of option trading service. There were 12 services, puts, calls, leaps, strangles, straddles, upside down, backward, whatevers. So by the end of that, we had, unbeknownst to us, created our unique selling proposition. We were the option girls, right? So there's all these financial newsletter publishers. They have all these, stock services and trading services with 56 different strategies from here to Timbuktu, but we knew options. And the universe of people who knew how to correctly write copy about options and who had done it for 10 years and who had seen every test known to mankind on every different category of options products was basically Lois and I, maybe Belinda Brewster, maybe like 2 more people, right? So that's a way that we let our freak flag fly and came up with our way to apply that to ourselves, right? So that's like the Schlitz beer example, right? So everyone's writing copy. So when you're thinking about that, there are things in your background that you know about that nobody else knows about. Maybe you were a chiropractor. Okay, well, you know a lot about backs that I do not know about backs, You were a speechwriter. That gives you insights into different things that I don't know about, right? So when you look at your background, that's what you need to think about.
Well, I would you really anticipate. In fact, maybe we should have coordinated some because I was going to say all the things you said there.
Why don't we jump ahead because he just gave me my 5-minute warning.
Oh, okay.
And
Let me just give you one quick example
Go
of
for
what
it.
you're talking about because it's the world's greatest example is Bob Bly. Is Bob here yet?
Yes.
He's going to be here in a few minutes.
Yeah, all right,
He is out
wave,
there.
Bob.
He's
you have
trying
to wave
to hide.
in the back. Yay! All right,
He's trying to hide back there.
Oh, no, he's going to get called out again in a minute.
He's trying to hide back there so he won't be besieged by groupies and autograph seekers. I know, Bob.
Including us.
But at any rate, he is the classic example of a copywriter using a unique selling proposition. He graduated with a degree in chemical engineering. And one of his first jobs was at Westinghouse, which is obviously a technical firm. And there he learned about promotion and everything and copywriting. And so when he went off as a freelance copywriter, he basically said, now look, who do you want to write your copy for your chemical company? Do you want somebody who graduated with a degree in chemical engineering, who knows how to write copy? Or do you want some art history major who writes novels on the side, Now, at this point, I have to admit that I was an art history major, and I write novels on the side. But it was a no-brainer, and that is a classic example of taking the unique selling proposition concept and applying it to yourself in addition to applying it to your products. We should probably skip these long quotes.
And we've talked a lot about this of how do you get attention. So Hopkins was a workaholic of the worst degree. I think we can, by the time you're done with this book, how many people think he's a workaholic? Pretty much. But he also speaks of work as fun. Okay? So how can we cultivate this attitude of work as play? That's my first part. That's part A of the question. And he says, I came to love work as other men love golf. I love it still. All right? Question 10, what do you think about the personal price that Hopkins admits that he paid? And is it possible to succeed in copywriting and have a personal life? What sacrifices have you made in your career, and were they worth it? And the reason I ask this is because we are here because we want to live the writer's life. We all have a certain lifestyle that we want. We don't want to be trapped in a closet for 95 hours a week and never see our children. I mean, how many people here came to AWAI to be trapped in a closet and never see your children and work 90 hours a week? Show of hands. Smart aleck in the back. So he says, fame came to me, but I did not enjoy it. Money came in measure, but I could never spend it with pleasure. My inclination has always been towards the quiet paths. When my old friends and I get together here, it is hard to decide who took the wiser course. Just made me want to cry. So what is, I want to ask you that. What is the price, and what have you paid, and what does it mean to you?
Well, I really struggle with this myself because I think there are people out there who view their work as play, and they tend to be very, very successful and wealthy people. But I am not one of them, though. I really think
you are wealthy and successful.
Well,
you just don't.
Not really. I mean, I really think of writing as being very hard work, and on most days I am just not in the mood for it. If I'm taking 2 months to write a magalog, for example, and they usually take 6 to 8 weeks, I would say there are probably maybe 2 or 3 days in there when I'm having fun. When everything seems to be flowing and I'm feeling I'm in the zone, I'm creative and imaginative, I'm in that kind of creative euphoria. But most days are not like that. The other days will just be like, digging ditches or plucking chickens or cleaning fish.
We can cut this part out later, right, out of the video.
Now, having said that, I've had a little glimpse of what the other kind of life is like because I've just completed a novel. I've written 3 novels, although unfortunately only one of them has been published. But
it was great. God doesn't shoot craps.
But I just finished one, and it was such a great experience because every day I would pop out of bed and I would run down to the keyboard. Sharon will verify this. I wouldn't even get out of my pajamas. I couldn't wait. And I worked for 4, 5, 6 hours a day, and then I'd go the next day and get up in the morning again. I was just so excited about it, and I know that there are people out there who feel that way about copywriting, but I am not one of them. I mean, so I wish I were like that. If some of you feel more like me than those other people, you might be wondering, well, what do you do? And the answer is, you just get up and you go to work. Because it's a job, Nobody promised you a rose garden. And I do not believe in writer's block. I really don't. I think if you ever got into a taxi cab and told the cab driver where you wanted to go, and the cab driver looked back at you and said, I'm sorry, I can't take you there because I have taxi cab driver's block. You would say, what the hell is this about, It's your job, so you got to go and do it every day. Now, the last thing, question number 10, and you already touched on it there, is particularly in this last reading of the book, I was very touched about those little insights that we got into him as a person. He had a somewhat unhappy childhood, or I would say a very unhappy childhood.
Pretty grim.
He had a father who was poor, and not because he was uneducated or anything like that. He just had some bad luck in life, and they were very poor. So he understood how poor people thought. But he had a mother who was very industrious and a very hard worker, and he felt that his success was combining those two things. And there's a very touching moment. I think you just read what I was thinking about. There's a very touching moment when he looks back and he says, and this is early in the book, he looks back and he says, I wondered if I stayed in Grand Rapids, if I'd stayed with the Bissell Carpet Cleaning Company, maybe I would have been a lot happier. Maybe if I'd stayed with my old friends, they all seem happier than I am. I thought that was very, very touching. And then yet at the end of the book, when he's talking about this huge country estate that he has and all
the gardeners.
Yes, and the money that he has. And by the way, I took some of those money figures and I put them in a real dollar calculator, and man, you wouldn't believe it would have made Clayton Makepeace jealous. I mean, when he talks about making $185,000 a year, that's $2.5 million in today's
Holy
use.
mackerel.
So he was just making money like crazy. So, but I wondered at the end of the book when he was talking to him, did he really feel that way, or was he rationalizing? And I always have to wonder about these people who work 16, 18 hours a day, because they were so far removed from my own experience. I do know this. I know that if you ever went into a psychiatrist and you said, "Doctor, I work 18 hours a day," you know what he would say? He would say, "What are you running from?" And that's a very, very good question. Now, on the other hand, I have to say, if you do work 16 or 18 hours a day, the chances are you're going to be a lot more successful, have a lot more money, a lot more influence, a lot more fame, a lot more power than a 2.5-hour-a-day guy like me. But it's not always the case. But I would just warn you that, working hard and getting rich is not necessarily the secret to happiness in life. I know a lot of people in this business who work very, very hard and they make a lot of money, and some of them are certainly happy, but I know some of them who are not particularly happy people at all. So I just keep that in mind. This is not all about money.
And I'll just sort of have two quick thoughts on that, and then we have a little surprise for you, so don't be leaving because you'll miss the really good surprise. So two thoughts very quickly. One is that for me, like you, I don't just do copywriting. I love to write. Writing is what I wanted to do. It's always what I wanted to do. So I do journal entries. I hope to do a novel. You're like my hero with that. I felt like I haven't even gotten my first one. You're on number 3. So for me, what helps me with my balance, and we talked about this, is that I find that if I'm only doing copywriting and I'm not doing the other writing that I love to do, if I'm not doing journal entries or poems or personal essays, that Jill is a very unhappy girl then, right? So what makes me happy is that balance. And so I have realized over the years that I have to have my poetry class at night, or I have to go to a creative writing workshop, or I have to take a retreat with my girlfriends who write and do something that has absolutely nothing to do with copywriting. And when I do that and I come back to the copy, my copy is more playful, it's more engaging, it has more passion in it. I've found my soul seat again. So for me, that balance is what keeps me engaged. There are other writers who tell me they absolutely hate to write. They think of this as a job. They know they're really good at it and it really pays the bills. But if I said to them when I say to them, I get up in the morning an extra hour early so I can have an hour to journal before I start my writing, they're like, why? And when they tell me that they get up an hour early to go run 5 miles and do 56 push-ups, I go, why? And then I want to have just a quick comment about the end, which is that this idea of what is your writer's life mean to you? So I want to give you all a little assignment here. What does living the writer's life mean to you? John Carlton talked about this morning. Several other folks have talked about this. The idea of having a goal, of knowing where you're going so that you'll know success when you achieve it. So for me, living the writer's life is not working 16 hours a day. I make a very good living. I am very blessed. I don't worry about my bills. I haven't had my electricity shut off in many years. It did happen when I first started working for Paris, but that's another story. For me, living the writer's life means that I have time that I can take care of my son who suffers from a severe illness. It means that I have time to be with my husband. It means I have time to travel. It means I have time to cook. If that means I never become a billionaire, that's okay with me because that's not one of my goals. My goal is to make a very good living as a writer, doing something that I love every day, balanced by taking care of my family, which is one of my goals, and by time to write for myself about my own personal journey, because that's something that's important to me. I know that that's my vision for what living the writer's life means for me, And so I can tell you when I've achieved it. And I don't have to achieve this vision. I have to achieve my vision. So I'm going to challenge all of you to join the conversation. Try to write like 2 or 3 paragraphs. You can even do the thing that John had you do this morning with the questions and post it on the Facebook page. Richard and I will be there. We will engage with you on that page, and we'll keep this conversation going. And now I'm going to wrap up by making our big surprise. First, I would like you to all turn, and Bob, you're going to have to wave again. So this is Bob Bly. He is our guest for next month's Great Books Club. And Bob has selected a fantastic book called Techniques for Producing Ideas. It is by James Webb Young. And he said the reason he picked this is to produce good writing, you must know something to write about. 2 of 5 steps in Young's book are dedicated to research, which I think is the missing ingredient for most mediocre copywriters. So I hope you will all join me next month with Bob Bly. We're going to be reading, as I said, James Webb Young's A Technique for Producing Ideas. And can I have another drum roll, please? Can we hit the table with a drum roll? Richard and I, Denise and Katie, AWAI has purchased for you, everyone in this room, a copy of James Webb Young's A Technique for Producing Ideas. This is demonstration in action, all right? They are doing the lesson from this book. So Katie and Denise, this was actually Denise's idea. She said, well, that's what you're talking about in the book. This is what he says to do. Let's do it. And she got online and she found a way to have these produced for all of you. Thank you very much. We'll see you next month with Bob Bly, A Technique for Producing Ideas.